The vast emptiness of the Kepler expanse buzzed with activity as hundreds of warships moved in perfect formation. Admiral Kextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the greatest military display the galaxy had ever seen. His forearms crossed behind his back in satisfaction as he observed the annual war games that brought together the most powerful civilizations in known space. 12 different species had gathered to show off their military might. The Etherians brought their beautiful crystal ships that sparkled like diamonds against the black void. These vessels moved like dancers, their hulls shifting colors as they communicated through light patterns. Nearby, the Mycelians deployed, their living ships that looked more like giant space whales than traditional warships. These bioorganic vessels pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, their hulls breathing like massive lungs as they floated through space. The sleek Tauri destroyers cut through space with razor-sharp precision, their metallic hulls reflecting the distant stars. Each ship represented thousands of years of technological advancement and military tradition. The war games were more than just practice. They were a show of power, a reminder of who ruled the galaxy. Kextar felt pride swell in his chest as he watched the coordinated movements. His own Vorthan Empire commanded the largest fleet present, with massive dreadnoughts that could crack planets in half. The other species respected Vorthan military doctrine, and rightfully so. They had been perfecting warfare for over 10,000 years. The mock battles played out exactly as planned. Formations wheeled and turned in complex patterns that had been practiced for months. Energy weapons fired harmless training beams, while defensive shields flared in brilliant displays of light. Everything moved according to ancient protocols and time-tested strategies. Then the sensors started screaming. Warning alarms blared across every ship as something impossible appeared on their screens. A massive energy signature was tearing through hyperspace, heading directly toward their position. The readings made no sense. Whatever was coming was huge, far larger than any known class of warship. Space itself seemed to rip apart as something emerged from the swirling vortex of hyperspace. The assembled fleets fell silent as they stared at the newcomer. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The ship was enormous, easily dwarfing even the largest Vorthan dreadnoughts. But its size wasn't what made everyone freeze in shock. It was the design. Where galactic ships were elegant and graceful, this vessel looked like it had been built for one purpose only: war. Its hull was angular and brutal, covered in weapon emplacements that bristled like the spines of some deadly creature. Strange symbols covered its dark grey surface, completely unlike any known galactic script. The only readable marking was painted, in stark white letters along its side, UES Retribution. Nobody recognized the designation or what the letters meant. The beautiful formations of the war games dissolved into chaos as captains tried to understand what they were seeing. Communication. Channels erupted with confused voices, speaking in dozens of different languages. Admiral Kextar gripped the railing of his bridge, his confident smile fading as he stared at this impossible intruder. The mysterious ship hung motionless in space, silent and threatening, while the greatest military minds in the galaxy struggled to comprehend what had just arrived in their perfect, ordered universe. The communication officers across the fleet worked frantically at their stations, sending message after message toward the silent stranger. Every known frequency buzzed with attempts at contact. The Vorthan Empire broadcast in their ancient ceremonial language. The Etherians sent complex mathematical sequences that had worked with every species they had ever encountered. The Mycelians even tried biochemical signals that could communicate across space. Nothing worked. The massive ship just floated there like a sleeping giant, completely ignoring every attempt to talk to it. Admiral Kextar studied the vessel through his tactical display, his experienced eyes trying to make sense of what he was seeing. In his 10,000 years of military service, he had never encountered a ship design so completely wrong. Every civilized species in the galaxy followed certain rules when building their vessels. Form followed function, yes, but there was always elegance, always beauty mixed with purpose. This thing threw all those rules out the window. The ship looked like someone had taken the concept of a warship and stripped away everything except the ability to kill. Its hull was a nightmare of angles and edges, with no smooth curves or artistic touches. Weapon barrels jutted out from every surface like metallic thorns. Point defense turrets covered the ship so completely that finding a spot without guns seemed impossible. Most disturbing of all were the massive railgun batteries that ran along its spine. These weren't the elegant energy weapons that civilized species used. These looked like they were designed to throw chunks of metal at incredible speeds, a primitive but terrifyingly effective concept. Captain Yelandra of the Etherian Science, Vessel Crystal Harmony, decided to take action. Her people were known throughout the galaxy as peaceful explorers and diplomats. If anyone could make first contact with this mysterious vessel, it would be the Etherians. She ordered her ship forward, broadcasting peaceful intentions on every frequency. The Crystal Harmony was beautiful even by Etherian standards, its crystalline hull shifting through colors that represented friendship and curiosity. No species in the galaxy would mistake an Etherian science vessel for a threat. The approach seemed to go well at first. The massive ship remained motionless as the much smaller Crystal Harmony moved closer. Captain Yelandra prepared her first contact protocols, hoping to add another species to the galaxy's peaceful community. She never got the chance. When the Crystal Harmony crossed some invisible line in space, the stranger's weapons systems came alive instantly. There was no warning, no challenge, no attempt at communication. Point defense turrets that had been dormant suddenly swiveled with mechanical precision. Energy beams lanced out with brutal efficiency. The Crystal Harmony simply vanished. One moment it was there, broadcasting messages of peace and friendship. The next moment there was nothing but expanding gas and debris. The entire fleet recoiled in shock and horror. Captains who had been curious now prepared for battle, their crews manning weapons stations. But Admiral Kextar, despite his rage at watching peaceful explorers die, recognized something that chilled him to his core. The massive ship's weapons had already powered down. Its turrets returned to their neutral positions. There were no follow-up attacks, no aggressive posturing toward the rest of the fleet. This hadn't been an act of war. This had been an automatic response, as cold and impersonal as a computer program. The ship had detected an unknown contact approaching and had simply eliminated it without any conscious decision from its crew. What kind of species built ships that killed automatically, without even asking questions first? The silence stretched. For what felt like hours before the massive ship's communication array finally came to life. Static filled the channels, followed by a voice that spoke in perfect galactic standard, though with an accent none of them had ever heard before. "This is Captain Lee of the United Earth Ship Retribution. I apologize for your loss." The words were simple, but something in the speaker's tone made every being in the fleet pause. There was a weight to his voice, a bone-deep weariness that spoke of experiences no civilized species should have to endure. Admiral Kextar stepped forward, his anger barely contained. "You destroyed a peaceful science vessel without warning. Explain yourself immediately." A long pause followed before Captain Lee responded. "Your ship approached within our automated defense perimeter. After 3 centuries of war, we learned that hesitation means death. Our systems are programmed to eliminate any unidentified contact that enters weapons range. 3 centuries of war. The question came from multiple sources across the communication channels. What war? The galaxy has been at peace for over 5,000 years. Captain Lee's bitter laugh echoed through space, a sound so full of pain that it silenced the indignant voices. Peace? Yes, I suppose it would seem that way from your perspective. You've been living in peace while we've been dying for you. The communication channels erupted with confused chatter, but Captain Lee continued speaking, his voice growing harder with each word. 300 years ago, humanity encountered something from beyond our galaxy. We call them the Devourers. They consume everything, planets, stars, entire solar systems. They turn matter into more of themselves, spreading like a cancer across space. When we first detected them, we tried to warn everyone. We sent messages to every major civilization we could find. Admiral Kextar felt a cold chill run through his body. He remembered those messages decades ago. Primitive transmissions from a backwater system talking about impossible threats from outside the galaxy. The Council had dismissed them as the fantasies of a newly spacefaring species. You ignored us, Captain Lee continued, and now his voice carried barely controlled rage. The Great Galactic Council decided that humans were too primitive to understand what they were seeing. You told us to focus on developing our culture instead of spreading panic about imaginary monsters. The truth hit like a physical blow. Every species represented in the fleet had been part of that decision. They had laughed at the desperate warnings from Earth, treating them like children afraid of shadows. So we fought alone, Captain Lee said, his voice breaking slightly. 300 years of constant warfare. We learned to build ships like this one because elegant designs don't survive when facing an enemy that wants to devour your entire species. We learned to shoot first because asking questions gets you killed. The tactical displays across the fleet showed the true scope of the retribution. The ship was massive, but now they could see it was also scarred. Burn marks covered its hull. Entire sections had been rebuilt multiple times. This wasn't just a warship. It was a survivor. Earth fell 2 years ago, Captain Lee announced, and the simple statement carried the weight of absolute finality. The Devourers consumed our home system completely. This ship carries 47,000 humans in cryogenic sleep. We are what remains of a species that once numbered in the billions. The communication channels fell completely silent. Every being in the fleet was struggling to process what they had just heard. An entire species, fighting and dying alone while the galaxy continued its peaceful existence, completely unaware of the war being fought on their behalf. We've been running for 2 years, Captain Lee concluded, looking for somewhere safe to rebuild. But there is nowhere safe. The Devourers are coming for all of you next. Admiral Kextar's patience finally snapped. The human story sounded impossible, like something from a nightmare rather than reality. No single species could fight a war for 3 centuries without the galaxy knowing about it. And these claims about planet-eating monsters from another galaxy. It was too much. Enough of this nonsense, the Admiral growled into his communicator. You expect us to believe that your primitive species has been fighting some imaginary threat, while the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy remained ignorant. Prove these ridiculous claims or prepare to be detained for the destruction of an Etherian vessel. The silence that followed felt different from before. When Captain Lee spoke, again his voice had changed. The exhaustion was still there, but now it was mixed with something colder, more dangerous. You want proof, Admiral? Very well. Your war games include defensive platforms, correct? Those massive installations designed to test fleet combat capabilities. Admiral, Kextar glanced at his tactical display. The war games did indeed feature several enormous defensive platforms scattered throughout the training area. Each one was the size of a small moon, bristling with the most advanced weapons and shields the galaxy could produce. They were designed to withstand attacks from entire fleets for weeks at a time. Those platforms represent the pinnacle of galactic defensive technology, Kextar replied proudly. It would take coordinated attacks from multiple battle groups to even damage one of them. I see, Captain Lee said quietly. Stand back. Across the fleet, sensor operators watched in confusion as the human battleship began to move. The Retribution turned with surprising grace for something so massive, its hull rotating until its main weapons faced the nearest defensive platform. Warning lights began flashing across the human ship's surface as its weapon systems powered up. The sound that followed would haunt every survivor for the rest of their lives. It wasn't the elegant hum of energy weapons that civilized species used. This was something primal and terrifying. The roar of weapons designed not for show but for absolute destruction. The Retribution's main railguns spoke first. Chunks of metal accelerated to nearly the speed of light tore through space, striking the defensive platform's shields with unimaginable force. The energy barriers that could stop conventional weapons for months simply shattered like glass. Before anyone could react, the fusion torpedoes followed. These weren't the controlled, precise warheads that galactic fleets used. These were miniature stars, each one carrying the destructive power of a solar core. They detonated against the platform's hull in brilliant flashes that briefly outshone the nearby star. The defensive platform, which should have taken weeks of concentrated fire to destroy, simply came apart. Metal that had been forged in the hearts of ancient stars was torn into component atoms. The explosion was so massive that Ships thousands of kilometers away had to raise their shields against the radiation, but Captain Lee wasn't finished. The Retribution's point defense systems engaged the remaining platforms simultaneously. Beams of coherent energy and streams of hypervelocity projectiles reached out across impossible distances. Each shot found its target with mechanical precision. In less than 3 minutes, every defensive platform in the training area had been reduced to expanding clouds of superheated gas. The human battleship floated calmly in the center of the destruction, its weapons already powering down, as if nothing significant had happened. The fleet stared in absolute silence at the floating debris that had once been the galaxy's most advanced defensive installations. Admiral Kextar felt his legs give out as he collapsed into his command chair, finally understanding the true scope of what humanity had become. They weren't primitives playing with advanced technology. They were apex predators who had learned to kill gods. The silence that followed the destruction of the defensive platforms was broken by Captain Lee's voice, now carrying a tone of grim authority that demanded attention from every being in the fleet. Now that I have your attention, let me tell you about the real enemy. 300 years ago, our deep space telescopes detected something impossible happening in the Andromeda Galaxy. Entire star systems were going dark, not from natural causes, but from something that was actively consuming them. Across the fleet, science officers began frantically checking their own long-range sensors, trying to confirm what the human was saying. What they found sent chills through every bridge crew. "The Andromeda Galaxy is gone," Captain Lee continued, his words hitting like hammer blows. "Not destroyed in some cosmic catastrophe, but eaten, consumed by entities we call the Devourers. They're not like any life form you've ever encountered. They don't just kill planets, they convert them into more of themselves." Admiral Kextar found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "That's impossible. An entire galaxy cannot simply disappear." "Look at your sensors, Admiral. When was the last time you received any signals from Andromeda? Any radio waves? Any light that wasn't billions of years old? The galaxy that should be our closest neighbor is nothing but a dark void now." The tactical displays across the fleet confirmed the horrible truth. Where Andromeda should have been visible, there was only empty space. The galaxy that had been a constant presence in the night sky for billions of years was simply gone. "The sea. Devourers work systematically," Captain Lee explained, and now his voice carried the weight of someone who had studied this enemy for lifetimes. "They start at the edges of a galaxy, consuming star systems one by one. They use the matter to build more of themselves, creating vast networks of living technology that spread like cancer through space." Reports began flooding in from across the galactic communication network. Colony worlds that had gone silent over the past few years, dismissed as victims of pirates or internal conflicts, suddenly took on a much more sinister meaning. Commander Veltar of the Vorten Empire spoke up, his voice shaking. "Admiral, we've lost contact with 17 Outer Rim colonies in the past 18 months. We assumed it was due to civil unrest or communication failures." Similar reports came from other species. The mycelians detected what they called wrong flavors in space where thriving systems should have been. The Etherians found areas where their crystalline resonance networks had simply stopped responding, as if the planets themselves no longer existed. "Your colonies aren't silent because of rebellions or technical problems," Captain Lee said, and his words carried the finality of absolute certainty. "They're silent because they've been devoured. The Devourers have been working their way through the outer spiral arms of our galaxy for decades, while you remained completely unaware. The horror of realization spread through the fleet like a physical wave. Species that had considered themselves the masters of the galaxy suddenly understood that they had been living on borrowed time, protected only by humanity's desperate sacrifice. We estimate that the Devourers have consumed roughly 30% of the galaxy's outer rim," Captain Lee continued. "They move slowly but methodically, converting each system they encounter into part of their vast network. At their current rate of expansion, they'll reach the inner systems within 50 years. Admiral Kextar stared at his tactical displays, watching as his staff overlaid the pattern of lost colonies with humanity's predictions. The correlation was perfect and terrifying. A clear line of consumption was advancing inward, heading directly toward the galaxy's populated core. "Why didn't you warn us again?" someone asked over the communication channels. Captain Lee's response was bitter and final. "We tried. For 300 years we sent warnings, pleas for help, detailed intelligence reports. You ignored every single one. You were too busy with your politics and your perfect civilization to listen to the primitives who were dying to protect you." The weight of collective guilt settled over the fleet as they realized the truth. Humanity had been the galaxy's shield for 3 centuries, and they had faced that nightmare completely alone. Within hours of Captain Lee's revelation, the greatest emergency session in galactic history was underway. The beautiful council chambers on the neutral world of Nexus Prime, usually filled with dignified debates about trade routes and cultural exchanges, now buzzed with panic and desperate voices speaking over each other in dozens of languages. Admiral Kextar found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to explain to the Council how their entire understanding of galactic security had been completely wrong. The holographic displays around the chamber showed the devastating truth. Entire sectors of space that had gone dark while the Council members argued about territorial disputes and economic policies. 17 Vorton colonies, he announced to the Assembly, his voice heavy with shame. Gone. We blamed pirates, rebels, anything except the truth staring us in the face. The Etherian representative, her crystalline form flickering with colors that expressed deep distress, added her own painful admission. "Our resonance networks have been failing for years. We thought it was natural decay, but now we see the pattern. The silence spreads inward, system by system." Commander Zelnara of the Mycelian Collective spoke through biochemical signals that the translation systems converted to words heavy with grief. "Our bioships have been detecting death sense in space where life should flourish. We assumed it was some unknown plague, but the human speaks truth. Something has been eating our worlds." The reports kept coming, each one more damning than the last. The proud Tauri Confederation admitted losing contact with their entire outer defense grid. The ancient Keth Moran Empire, which had existed for over 50,000 years, revealed that their oldest colony worlds had simply stopped responding to communication attempts. As the scope of the disaster became clear, something unprecedented happened in the council chambers. Species that had spent millennia considering themselves superior to everyone else began asking for help from the humans they had dismissed as primitives. "Captain Lee," came a voice from the Etherian delegation, and the formal tone couldn't hide the desperation beneath. "Your species has experience fighting these devourers. We need your knowledge." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The same council that had rejected humanity's warnings for 3 centuries was now begging for their expertise. The species that had refused to even grant humans observer status in galactic affairs now hung on every word from the battered warship floating in space above them. Captain Lee's response came through the communication systems, and his voice carried no satisfaction at being proven right, only exhaustion and grim determination. "For 300 years we sent you detailed reports about devourer tactics, their technology, their weaknesses. We shared everything we learned through blood and sacrifice. You filed our reports under primitive superstition and went back to your comfortable lives." The council chamber fell silent as the weight of their collective failure settled over them. These proud civilizations, who had spent eons perfecting art and philosophy while humans fought and died in the dark between stars, now faced the humbling truth of their situation. "While you debated trade agreements," Captain Lee continued, "we were developing weapons that could actually hurt these things. While you held cultural festivals, we were learning how to fight an enemy that turns planets into weapons. While you lived in peace, we paid the price in blood to buy you time you didn't even know you had." The silence stretched painfully as species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia realized they were completely unprepared for the war that was already at their doorstep. Finally, Admiral Kextar spoke the words that everyone in the chamber was thinking but none wanted to say. "We need you to teach us how to survive." The council chamber remained eerily quiet as Captain Lee's terms echoed through the communication systems. His voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of warfare and the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. "You want our help to survive what's coming," he said, and every word was measured and deliberate. "But help comes with conditions. We're not going to hand over 300 years of hard-won knowledge just so you can make the same mistakes." That got us all into this situation. Admiral Kextar leaned forward in his seat, dreading what was coming next. He had negotiated with dozens of species over his long career, but this felt different. This wasn't a negotiation between equals. This was a reckoning. "First," Captain Lee announced, "humanity gets full membership in the Galactic Council with all the rights and privileges you've denied us for centuries. No more dismissing us as primitives. No more filing our reports under cultural curiosities. We get a voice in every decision that affects galactic security." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Several species had spent decades blocking human membership applications, citing their aggressive tendencies and primitive military focus. Now those same traits were humanity's greatest assets. "Second, I want supreme military command of all combined galactic forces, not advisory positions, not consultation roles, complete operational control. Every ship, every weapon, every tactical decision goes through human command structure." The murmurs turned into shocked gasps. Species that had commanded their own fleets for millennia were being asked to surrender control to beings they had considered barely civilized just hours before. Commander Veltara of the ancient Kethmaran Empire rose to her feet, her voice filled with indignation. "You ask us to abandon thousands of years of military tradition. Our tactical doctrines have been refined across countless conflicts." Captain Lee's response was swift and brutal. "Your tactical doctrines got your colonies eaten while you remained completely unaware. Your military traditions are designed for fighting other civilized species, not for survival against an enemy that wants to convert your entire galaxy into biomass." The harsh truth silenced the protests. Every species in the chamber had to confront the fact that their beautiful, elegant military philosophies were completely useless against the Devourers. "Third," Captain Lee continued, "every ship in your fleets gets redesigned according to human specifications. No more crystal palaces floating through space. No more bioships that prioritize aesthetics over armor. Your vessels will be rebuilt as weapons of war designed for one purpose, killing Devourers and surviving their counterattacks." The Etherian representative's crystalline form flickered with distressed colors. "Our ships are works of art, expressions of our cultural identity spanning millions of years. You're asking us to destroy our heritage." "I'm asking you to survive," Captain Lee replied, and his voice carried the weight of watching Earth die. "Your heritage won't matter if you're all dead. The Devourers don't care about your cultural achievements or your artistic expressions. They only care about converting your matter into more of themselves." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of civilizations being forced to choose between their pride and their survival. Species that had spent eons developing perfect societies now faced the reality that perfection meant nothing against extinction. Admiral Kextar finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "And if we refuse these terms?" Captain Lee's response was simple and final. "Then you face the Devourers alone just like we did. And in 50 years, when they reach the inner systems, you'll understand exactly why we made these demands. The only difference is that by then, it will be too late." The council chamber fell into stunned silence as the greatest civilizations in the galaxy realized they had no choice but to surrender their pride to the species they had spent centuries dismissing as primitive. 6 months after the Council's reluctant agreement to humanity's terms, the first joint fleet assembled in the ruins of what had once been the Kepler system. The transformation was shocking to witness. Ships that had once been symbols of artistic achievement and cultural pride now bristled with weapons designed for a single purpose: absolute destruction. Captain Lee stood on the bridge of the Retribution, studying the tactical displays that showed their combined fleet. It was smaller than what the individual species used to field, but every vessel had been rebuilt according to human specifications learned through centuries of desperate warfare. The Etherian vessels were perhaps the most dramatically changed. Their beautiful crystal hulls now served as focusing arrays for weapons that could cut through Devourer armor like hot knives through ice. Where once they had prioritized elegant communication through light patterns, they now channeled that same technology into targeting systems of devastating precision. "Etherian Squadron Alpha reporting ready," came the voice of Commander Yelneth, her tone carrying none of the musical quality her species was known for. Months of human training had taught her people that survival meant abandoning beauty for brutality. The mycelian bioships floated nearby, their living hulls pulsing with new purpose. Instead of the gentle bioluminescence that had once marked them as peaceful explorers, they now carried human fusion warheads in specialized organic pods. The ships themselves had been modified to regenerate faster, heal battle damage in real time, and, most importantly, explode with devastating force if they were about to be captured. "Mycelian biofleet ready for deployment," reported Commander Zelkai, his biochemical signals now carrying the harsh efficiency that human tactical doctrine demanded. The Vorthan dreadnoughts had undergone the most extensive modifications. Their elegant energy shields now worked in conjunction with layers of physical armor that could withstand direct hits from Devourer conversion beams. Their weapon systems had been completely replaced with human-designed railguns and fusion cannons. Admiral Kextar's voice crackled over the communication channels, and the pride that had once defined his species was now tempered with hard-won respect for human military wisdom. "Vorthan Heavy Assault Group ready to engage. All ships report green status on human weapon systems." Captain Lee nodded grimly as he studied the tactical situation ahead. Long-range sensors had detected a Devourer nest in the outer system, a massive structure that had once been 3 planets, now converted into a single organism dedicated to producing more of the galaxy-eating entities. "All ships, this is your final briefing," Captain Lee announced to the combined fleet. "Forget everything you knew about warfare before today. Devourers don't retreat, they don't negotiate, and they don't show mercy. They will try to convert every ship in this fleet into more of themselves. Our job is to kill them before they get the chance." The attack began with a precision that would have been impossible under the old galactic military doctrines. Instead of the elaborate formations and honorable challenges that had characterized warfare for millennia, the human-led fleet struck. Like a surgical blade, Etherian precision weapons lanced out across impossible distances, their crystal-focused beams punching through Devourer defensive screens with pinpoint accuracy. The creature's adaptive shields, which had easily absorbed the elegant energy weapons of traditional galactic fleets, simply couldn't cope with the raw, focused destruction of human-modified systems. Mycelian bioships dove directly into the heart of the nest, their living hulls absorbing and redirecting Devourer conversion attempts, while delivering fusion warheads directly into critical systems. Ships that would have been destroyed instantly under the old tactical doctrines now used their biological nature as both weapon and shield. The Vortan dreadnoughts provided devastating covering fire, their human-designed weapons tearing through Devourer structures that had seemed indestructible just months before. Railgun rounds accelerated to near-light speed, created massive kinetic explosions that shattered the alien architecture like glass. For the first time in 3 centuries of warfare, the Devourers were taking more damage than they could regenerate. The nest that should have been able to convert an entire star system began to collapse under the relentless assault of the human-led alliance. When the battle ended 12 hours later, the impossible had been achieved. They had actually won. News of the impossible victory at Kepler system spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. For the first time in 3 centuries, someone had not just survived an encounter with the Devourers, they had actually won. The psychological impact was enormous, shattering the sense of hopelessness that had begun to grip civilizations as they realized the true scope of the threat. Within days of the battle, communication channels throughout the galaxy buzzed with activity. Species that had never heard of humans before were suddenly demanding to know everything about these mysterious warriors who had accomplished the impossible. The victory recordings were studied frame by frame, analyzed by military experts who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Captain Lee, now bearing the newly created rank of Fleet Admiral of Combined Forces, stood on the bridge of the Retribution as reports flooded in from across known space. The bridge that had once been a lonely command center for humanity's last survivors was now crowded with representatives from dozens of species, all eager to join the alliance that had proven the Devourers could be beaten. Commander Thexani of the remote Quillian Syndicate was among the first to arrive, her insectoid features showing a respect that would have been unthinkable just months before. "Fleet Admiral," she said, her translator rendering her chittering speech into Galactic Standard, "my people control mining operations in 47 systems. We pledge our entire industrial capacity to your war effort." Similar offers came from across the galaxy. The Helix Confederacy offered their shipyards. The Wanderer fleets brought their expertise in deep space navigation. Even the reclusive Sage Collective, who had avoided galactic politics for thousands of years, emerged from their hidden worlds to offer their advanced computational abilities. But it wasn't just the military assets that mattered. What truly amazed Admiral Lee was how quickly the galaxy was adapting to human philosophy. Species that had spent millennia focused on art, culture, and peaceful exploration were learning to think like soldiers. They were embracing concepts that had been foreign to them just months before. The idea that sometimes survival required ugly choices, that honor meant nothing if you were dead, and that victory was the only acceptable outcome. The Etherian children were learning to build weapons instead of sculptures. Vicelian youth were studying military tactics instead of poetry. Vorthan academies that had taught philosophy for 10,000 years now offered courses in guerrilla warfare and asymmetric tactics. "You know what I find most interesting, Admiral?" Lee said to Commander Veltara as they watched the tactical displays showing Allied fleets forming across the galaxy. "It's not our technology that's making the difference. Any of these species could have built weapons like ours if they'd really tried." The Kethmoran officer nodded, her ancient features showing a wisdom that came from finally understanding humanity's true nature. "It's your refusal to give up, isn't it? Your species has something the rest of us lost long ago." Admiral Lee smiled grimly as he watched another species pledge their fleets to the Alliance. "We learned something during our 300 years of war that the rest of the galaxy never had to learn. We discovered that there are worse things than death, like extinction, and when you're facing extinction, you do whatever it takes to survive." The strategic displays showed the true scope of what they were building. Hundreds of species were now working together under human leadership, their fleets being rebuilt according to human specifications, their military doctrines rewritten based on humanity's hard-won experience. But perhaps most importantly, they were learning to think like humans, to never surrender, never give up hope, and never accept defeat as long as there was still breath in their bodies. The galaxy that had once fallen silent in shock at humanity's arrival was now roaring with determination. The greatest war in cosmic history was beginning, and for the first time since the Devourers had begun their advance, the Defenders had hope. Under human leadership, the galaxy was no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting to reclaim their future among the stars.